Hey everyone! Tonight, one of the most powerful men in England is waiting beside Henry VIII's toilet. His name is Sir Henry Norris. He is a knight, a wealthy courtier, and one of the king's closest companions. Noblemen ask for his help. Ambassadors treat him carefully. Men hoping for land, money, or promotion know that a quiet word from Norris may reach Henry before their official request does. Yet his title is Groom of the Stool. His position places him beside the king, while Henry uses a padded wooden toilet chair. The chair is known as a close stool. Beneath its seat is a removable container. Nearby are water, linen, clean clothing, and servants responsible for removing what remains after the king leaves. This sounds like one of the worst jobs in the palace. Instead, it becomes one of the most valuable. The groom can enter rooms closed to almost everyone else. He sees Henry before the king appears in public, while he is dressing, washing, resting, or attending to his private needs. He knows whether Henry has slept well, whether he is in pain, and whether approaching him with a difficult request would be wise. Outside the chamber, powerful men may wait for hours. Inside, the groom is already speaking to the king. This access could change lives. A name mentioned at the right moment might lead to a royal appointment. A petition placed where Henry would notice it might be answered before dozens of others. A warning about a rival could reach the king when no rival was present to defend himself. The groom did not rule England from beside a toilet, but he stood close enough to the ruler that people treated his friendship as a form of power. And Sir Henry Norris rose higher than most. He hunted with Henry, handled private business, and became a familiar presence inside the rooms where the king lowered his guard. Then, in 1536, everything changed. Norris was accused of sleeping with Anne Boleyn. The accusation was almost certainly false. Within weeks, the man trusted beside Henry in his most private moments was arrested and executed. His closeness to the king had made him powerful. It had also placed him close enough to be destroyed. Why did English kings give such an intimate job to knights and gentlemen instead of ordinary servants? What did the groom of the stool actually do? And how did responsibility for a royal toilet become connected to money, patronage, secret conversations, and political influence? Tonight, we will enter Henry VIII's private chamber, examine the strange office behind the famous title, and follow the men who discovered that the shortest path to power sometimes passed through the king's toilet. Before we begin, you can subscribe if you enjoy calm journeys through the stranger details of history. Then settle back and imagine a palace where hundreds of people serve the king, but only a few are trusted to remain after the door closes. The first thing to understand is that the title sounds simpler than the job. A groom of the stool was connected to the king's toilet, but he was not merely a cleaner carrying away a dirty container. The office belonged to the private royal household, a part of court in which service to the king's body, clothes, money, rooms, and daily routine could overlap. The famous question is whether the groom personally wiped the king. It is possible that intimate assistance sometimes included cleaning the royal body. Tudor monarchs did not possess modern bathrooms, toilet paper, plumbing, or the expectation that every private act should be completed entirely alone. A ruler who required help dressing, bathing, shaving, traveling, eating, and sleeping could also receive help at the close stool. But the evidence does not provide a neat daily description in which every groom performs exactly the same action. Household offices changed over time. Duties could be delegated. Lower servants prepared water and linen, moved furniture, emptied vessels, cleaned rooms, washed cloth, and disposed of waste. A high-ranking groom might supervise arrangements and attend the king without personally completing every unpleasant task associated with the chair. The safest answer is less dramatic than the legend. The groom was responsible for attendance at the royal stool and for the private world around it. That responsibility was intimate enough to create trust. The trust created access. The access created influence. The word stool itself can mislead a modern listener. A stool is a simple seat without a back, but in royal household language, it could refer to the close stool, a chair designed to conceal a chamber pot. It looked more like a piece of furniture than the exposed seat found in a communal latrine. The king could use it inside a private room rather than walking to an outdoor privy or sharing a long bench with other members of the household. The word close suggested enclosure and privacy. A wooden box or chair surrounded the removable vessel. The seat could be padded. Historic royal palaces describes Henry's close stools as being covered with sheepskin, black velvet, and ribbons. That decoration did not change the purpose of the object, but it did make the object suitable for a king. Royal life did not remove ordinary bodily needs. It covered them in expensive material. The container beneath might be made from metal or pottery. After use, it had to be removed, emptied, washed, and returned. Linen had to be supplied, water had to be carried. Clothing had to be protected. The room had to be aired and kept clean enough for the monarch to remain there. Nothing disappeared by magic. The palace produced waste on a large scale, and servants moved it through corridors, courtyards, drains, pits, river access, and communal facilities. Henry's stool was private. The labor supporting it was not. At Hampton Court, lower-ranking courtiers could use communal toilets known as jakes. The palace also possessed a large facility, later called the Great House of Easement, with seats for several people at once. Historic royal palaces notes that one royal toilet block could accommodate 14 users. There was no expectation that each courtier would receive a silent, tiled room with a locking door. A person sat beside others over channels or pits. Waste dropped below. Water, gravity, regular cleaning, and location near the river could help carry it away. Those smells and blockages remained part of palace life. Elsewhere, people relied upon chamber pots. A servant sleeping in crowded lodging might use a vessel at night and empty it later. A noble visitor could have a more comfortable arrangement inside private apartments. The quality of the container changed with rank, but someone still had to carry it. The palace contained hundreds of bodies. They ate, drank, sweated, became sick, menstruated, vomited, relieved themselves, and generated dirty linen. The grand rooms seen by visitors depended upon kitchens, laundries, drains, storehouses, sculleries, fuel yards, and workers who entered before the court woke. The groom of the stool stood at the most privileged end of this system. He did not serve a row of anonymous users. He served one body treated as the center of the kingdom. To see why this mattered, begin outside Henry's rooms. A Tudor palace did not place the king at the end of one ordinary corridor where anyone could knock. The route toward him passed through a sequence of spaces. Each doorway reduced the number of people allowed to continue. At Hampton Court, a visitor might begin among the crowds of the outer court and Great Hall. Food was served, officials moved through business, servants carried dishes, petitioners searched for useful acquaintances, musicians, guards, clergy, craftsmen, messengers, and noble households filled the building. Beyond the public areas came chambers controlled more carefully. The great watching chamber acted as a filter. Guards watched who approached. Rank, invitation, office, and favor determined whether a person could pass. Beyond that lay rooms of greater privilege. The presence chamber displayed monarchy publicly. Henry could sit beneath a canopy, receive important visitors, dine formally, and allow people to see the distance between king and subject. Farther inside were the privy chamber, with drawing rooms, sleeping spaces, and smaller rooms used by the king and the men who attended his person. The closer a person moved toward the bedchamber, the fewer witnesses remained. Access did not simply mean seeing Henry. It meant seeing a different version of Henry. In the public chamber, the king was dressed, prepared, guarded, and surrounded by ceremony. His clothes announced wealth. His posture announced authority. His attendants knew where to stand. A petitioner approaching in that setting faced a ruler whose public role had already begun. In the private rooms, Henry could be less formal. He might eat with selected companions, listen to music, play cards, discuss hunting, complain about an injury, laugh at a joke, examine a gift, or speak about a person who was not present. None of this made him harmless or ordinary. A private king remained a king, but conversation changed when the audience became smaller. The man beside Henry could speak without addressing an entire court. He could notice hesitation. He could stop before saying too much. He could return to a subject later. This is why control of access mattered. A minister might possess an official title and still need the king's attention. A duke might own enormous estates and still wait outside. An ambassador might carry instructions from an emperor and still depend upon a chamber officer to know when Henry would receive him. The men who guarded the inner rooms occupied a narrow space between servant and gatekeeper. The groom stood at their head. The surviving rules of Henry's household show how carefully this privacy was arranged. In January 1526, the ordinances of Eltham set down detailed instructions for court life. The rules were associated with Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, Henry's chief minister, and attempted to regulate a household that could become crowded, expensive, and politically difficult. The day began before the king appeared. Pages of the chamber were expected to rise at about 7 in the morning. They made the fire and warned the esquires for the body to prepare. Servants waited at doors rather than entering wherever they pleased. Clothing and night gear moved inward through approved hands. The 6 gentlemen of the privy chamber were to be ready when Henry rose. They dressed him. The ordinances state that grooms and ushers were not to lay hands upon the royal person unless Henry ordered it. They might warm clothes or bring items, but the selected gentlemen performed the intimate act of putting garments upon the king. This restriction tells us more than a list of chores. Touch was ranked. Not everyone allowed into the palace could enter the chamber. Not everyone allowed into the chamber could touch Henry. The king's body had its own hierarchy. The barber followed similar rules. He needed water, cloths, knives, combs, scissors, and other tools ready when the king rose. He was told to keep himself and his clothing clean. He was warned against mixing with people considered disreputable, because disease or contamination might reach Henry through him. The concern was practical and symbolic. A barber worked close to the king's face and throat with sharp metal. He touched skin. He used tools capable of carrying infection even though no one understood bacteria in modern terms. His habits outside the palace could create danger inside it. Royal service required discipline because intimacy created risk. The same principle applied to speech. Members of the Privy Chamber were ordered to keep secret what was said or done there. They were not to repeat the king's private activities to outsiders. They were not to complain about when Henry went to bed, when he rose, where he traveled, or how he spent his time. The chamber generated information everyone wanted. The men inside were valuable partly because they possessed it. A careless sentence in a tavern could reveal illness, travel plans, a quarrel, a new favorite, a delayed decision, or a change in royal mood. An ambassador could build a report from fragments. A rival courtier could prepare an approach. A rumor could become political fact before the king knew it had left the room. Secrecy was therefore not decoration. It was one of the duties of the office. Imagine arriving for the morning watch. You have slept in palace lodging, though perhaps not comfortably. Court accommodation follows rank, and even important people may share spaces or find servants spread across pallets, benches, and temporary rooms. The palace has been noisy during the night. Fires need fuel. Doors open, guards change. Somewhere a chamber pot is carried away. You dress before entering the king's apartments. Your own clothing matters. A stain, smell, or disorderly appearance reflects badly upon your service. You are expected to look like a gentleman because you are one. The first rooms are already active. Pages carry garments. A fire has been revived. Water arrives in vessels. The barber checks his tools. Someone brings the king's shirt, doublet, hose, gown, shoes, jewelry, and whatever clothing has been chosen for the day. The garments are not selected casually. Weather, ceremony, visitors, hunting, worship, mourning, and display all affect what Henry wears. The king's body becomes a public image, one layer at a time. Your task is not to admire the embroidery. Your task is to be ready before Henry asks. Henry may have decided the previous evening when he wishes to rise. That does not guarantee an easy morning. He might sleep later. He might wake earlier. He might be unwell. He might call for a particular person. He might decide to hunt and change the routine. A servant's time belongs to the monarch. Waiting is part of the work. The men in the chamber learn Henry's preferences. Which garment irritates him? Which shoe fits badly? How warm he wants the room? Whether he wants conversation before dressing? Whether silence is safer? They learn to read small signs without staring. A king cannot be treated like a theatrical prop, yet everything around him is performance. His attendants must make ceremony appear natural. Sleeves are ready. Fastenings close. Jewelry arrives. A cloak falls correctly. The monarch emerges as though he has simply become magnificent. The preparation remains behind the door. So does the stool. The close stool could be moved. It did not belong permanently to one room in the way a modern toilet is fixed to pipes. Henry traveled between palaces, hunting lodges, progresses, and temporary accommodation. His household followed him with beds, hangings, tableware, clothes, documents, cooking equipment, horses, servants, and furniture needed to create royal life wherever he stayed. The stool traveled because the king did. Its coverings, pots, linen, and other supplies had to be packed and accounted for. A room had to be chosen. Privacy had to be guarded. Servants had to know where to bring water and where to remove waste. The object was small compared with a throne. Its movement still required administration. This is one reason the title should not be imagined as a single unpleasant action. The office sat within a chain of preparation, attendance, transport, storage, cleaning, and supervision. A groom responsible for the stool also stood near the organization of the king's private rooms. The toilet chair opened a door into larger authority. Modern embarrassment can hide the logic of the Tudor court. We often separate personal care from public status. A nurse or care worker may perform intimate labor without receiving political power. A cleaner may enter a senior official's office after hours without becoming part of government. Proximity alone does not automatically create influence. The Tudor monarchy worked differently because government remained deeply personal. Documents, councils, courts, and officials existed. England was not administered entirely through conversations beside a bed. Yet the king's will remained central, and access to that will mattered. Henry appointed officers. Henry granted lands. Henry approved marriages among important families. Henry received petitions. Henry rewarded service. Henry could promote, forgive, delay, investigate, imprison, or refuse. Formal systems carried these decisions outward, but many decisions began with the king hearing a name or forming an opinion. The man who could speak to him repeatedly possessed an advantage that no written rule could completely remove. The office also carried honor, because service close to the body of a monarch was not automatically considered degrading. A noble household was built upon personal attendance. Young men from important families could enter service to learn manners, warfare, administration, and connections. To hold a basin, present a garment, carve meat, carry a cup, or assist a ruler could become a visible sign of trust. The object itself did not determine status. The person served did. Carrying an ordinary stranger's shirt might look like menial labor. Carrying the king's shirt before the court could become privilege. The same principle reached the stool. No one confused the task with ruling the country. Yet the man permitted to remain during the king's most private bodily routine had crossed a boundary closed to almost everyone else. His presence announced intimacy. Others translated intimacy into influence. That influence could be exaggerated. A courtier might claim that the groom could obtain anything because such a claim made his own connection sound valuable. A petitioner might offer a gift and later insist that the groom had promised success. Enemies could accuse a chamber officer of corrupting the king even when Henry had made the decision himself. Historians also need caution. Political events are easier to explain when one powerful favorite appears to whisper everything into a ruler's ear. The image reduces complicated institutions, personal choices, factions, law, money, religion, and foreign pressure to one private conversation. Henry VIII was not controlled by whichever man stood nearest his chair. The historian G.W. Bernard, after studying William Compton, concluded that Compton used proximity mainly to serve the king and enrich himself rather than becoming a central maker of national policy. That distinction matters. Influence is not the same as control. Access creates opportunity. It does not guarantee victory. A groom might help a friend obtain an audience, remind Henry of a request, carry private money, deliver a message, or speak favorably about someone. He could accumulate offices and property. He could become a person courtiers cultivated. But he could not force Henry to agree. The king might listen and refuse. He might accept advice today and reject the same advice tomorrow. He might reward a man for years and then abandon him. The history of the office is therefore not a story about toilet servants secretly ruling England. It is a story about how personal monarchy gave unusual value to trust, information, and repeated access. To understand how that value developed, we need to meet the men who held the title before Henry Norris. The first of Henry VIII's reign had known the king long before the crown reached his head. His name was William Compton. William Compton entered royal service as a boy. His father died when William was young, and he became a ward of Henry VII. The king placed him as a page with Prince Henry, the child who would later become Henry VIII. Compton was several years older than the prince. That age difference may have made him useful as both companion and attendant. He grew up near Henry, shared activities with him, and belonged to the small group of men whose relationship with the future king began before political office turned every conversation into calculation. When Henry VIII succeeded in 1509, Compton rose quickly. He became a groom of the bedchamber, chief gentleman, and groom of the stool. He received castles, stewardships, land, and other offices. He traveled with the king, joined military service, took part in court entertainment, and accumulated an estate across many counties. His rise showed what private service could do. He had not inherited a place among the greatest nobles. Proximity to Henry created one. Compton's work cannot be reduced to the stool. He helped organize the young king's private life. He handled confidential errands. He knew the people Henry enjoyed. He understood the rhythms of hunting, tournaments, travel, pleasure, and courtship that occupied much of the early reign. Henry, in his 20s, was energetic. He rode hard, hunted for long hours, played tennis, danced, composed music, jousted, and surrounded himself with men able to match his enthusiasm. A favorite courtier needed physical skill as well as manners. The king did not want only grey officials carrying rolls of accounts. He wanted companions who could enter his games without slowing them. Compton fit that world. He could serve in the chamber and ride outside it. He could hold office and take part in entertainment. He could be useful without turning every private hour into a council meeting. That combination made him difficult for more formal ministers to control. The young men around Henry were sometimes called minions. The word did not originally carry only the modern meaning of a foolish subordinate. It could describe a favorite, especially a person accused of receiving intimacy or advancement beyond what older nobles thought proper. The insult revealed resentment. Some aristocrats believed that birth should place them naturally near the monarch. They watched men of lesser rank gain access through ability, friendship, appearance, sport, or household service. A groom who had known Henry since childhood could reach the king more easily than a duke whose ancestors had commanded armies. That inversion angered people. They did not object to hierarchy. They objected when the hierarchy failed to place them first. The Privy Chamber became a place where the king could create his own elite. Cardinal Wolsey understood the danger. As Henry's chief minister, Wolsey managed diplomacy, finance, law, church affairs, and much of government. His authority depended upon regular access to the king. No matter how many offices he held, another man could weaken him by reaching Henry privately with a different version of events. Wolsey, therefore, had reasons to regulate the chamber. The ordinances of Eltham reduced numbers, defined attendance, demanded secrecy, and organized the king's servants. They also attempted to control who could remain near Henry. This was partly good administration. A court approaching 1,000 people consumed money and created confusion. Servants duplicated work. Unauthorized people crowded rooms. Food, fuel, lodging, wages, and access required rules. But household reform was never politically neutral. To remove a man from the chamber was to move him away from the king. To place another man inside was to increase his opportunities. A list of servants could become a map of power. Henry did not always accept efforts to manage his favorites. A minister might identify a courtier as wasteful, disorderly, or unsuitable. The king might see the same man as entertaining, loyal, or honest. The chamber offered Henry privacy from his own government. That does not mean Henry entered it to escape responsibility. Important work followed him. Letters, reports, petitions, and visitors reached the inner rooms, yet the choice of who remained there belonged more directly to him. Wolsey could draft rules. Henry decided whom he wanted beside him. Compton survived because the relationship was personal. He also prospered. By the time of his death in 1528, he held property in many counties and had become extremely wealthy. His offices and grants reflected years of favor. Service to the king had transformed a royal ward into a major landholder. The stool had not made him rich by itself. The man sitting upon it had. Compton's career also shows why people offered gifts to chamber officers. Tudor patronage did not operate through one official application portal. A person seeking an office, lease, license, pardon, wardship, or royal grant looked for someone who could present the request effectively. The approach might be open and accepted. Gift exchange formed part of court life. A nobleman sent food, horses, cloth, jewelry, money, or hospitality. A courtier helped a relative. A servant recommended another servant. A successful petitioner rewarded the intermediary. The boundary between courtesy and bribery was not always clear. A gift given before a decision might appear to purchase influence. The same gift given afterward could be described as gratitude. Everyone understood that access had value, even when no one admitted that a decision had been sold. The groom's lodgings added to that value. Wherever the king stayed, the groom needed rooms near the private apartments. Location shortened distance. It also created a place where petitioners could find him. Imagine a courtier arriving with a request. He may not be allowed beyond the watching chamber. He does not know when Henry will appear. An official audience could take days to arrange. but he knows where Compton lodges. He sends a servant with a note. Perhaps he includes a gift. Perhaps he asks a mutual friend to carry the message. Compton reads the request before joining Henry. He may say nothing. He may mention it during a ride. He may advise the petitioner that the moment is wrong. He may carry the paper inside. Even refusal has value if it prevents a disastrous approach. The groom can tell a man not only how to reach the king, but when to remain silent. Timing mattered because Henry's mood was not an abstract curiosity. A request for money made after an expensive campaign could fail. A plea for mercy made while the king felt betrayed could sound like disloyalty. A proposed marriage might be welcome one month and threatening the next. The groom witnessed daily changes. He saw exhaustion after hunting. He saw pain after injury. He saw pleasure after music. He knew whether Henry wanted company or privacy. This knowledge did not require spying. It came from attendance. A chamber officer who understood Henry well could shape the presentation of a request without altering its content. He might shorten an explanation, delay a letter, begin with a joke, or mention a name connected to something the king already desired. Such skills rarely appear in official records. They leave results rather than transcripts. Compton died during the sweating sickness epidemic of 1528. The disease moved rapidly. A person could feel well, become feverish, sweat heavily, collapse, and die within hours. Court did not protect its members. Movement between households may have helped infection travel. Henry left places where cases appeared, sent anxious instructions, and feared for Anne Boleyn when she became ill and survived. Compton did not survive. His death removed a man who had stood beside Henry from youth into kingship. It also opened space within the private household. Court offices did not remain empty for long. A new man would gain the access, duties, requests, gifts, secrets, and dangers attached to the stool. That man was Henry Norris. Norris came from a gentry family and built his career through royal service. He appears in records performing household and court duties before reaching the highest position in the chamber. He became gentleman usher of the Black Rod in 1526, an office connected to the Order of the Garter and royal ceremony. He also held local posts, estates, and responsibilities that reflected growing favor. By the late 1520s, he was Groom of the Stool. Like Compton, he was more than a silent attendant. He jousted, he hunted, he accompanied Henry. He handled money through the privy purse. He controlled aspects of entry to the private apartments. The king treated him as a trusted friend. That friendship became visible to everyone watching. Norris's position placed him near both pleasure and business. The privy chamber was not one unchanging room in which the same men stood all day. It was a department, a set of spaces, and a group of attendants following the king through his residences. Henry moved between Greenwich, Hampton Court, Whitehall, Windsor, Eltham, hunting lodges, and other places. The chamber moved with him. Norris might attend a morning dressing, accompany hunting, organize private expenditure, receive a visitor, carry a message, and return for evening service. The title joined these activities under one relationship. He was responsible for the king's private attendance. The stool remained part of the office, but it did not consume every hour. His work with the privy purse deserves attention. The king required money for expenses that did not pass through every large department of government. Gifts, gambling, rewards, messengers, purchases, charity, entertainment, and personal business created constant small and large payments. The keeper of the privy purse recorded, received, and issued money connected to the king's private use. This did not make the groom sole controller of royal finance. England possessed the exchequer, treasury offices, household accounts, customs revenue, land income, and other systems. Yet private money gave the chamber administrative importance. A person who handled royal expenditure saw where attention moved. Payments revealed interests. A gift to a musician, reward to a messenger, purchase of jewelry, travel preparation, payment to a physician, or money sent through a confidential servant could expose decisions before public announcement. Accounting became another form of proximity. Norris also benefited from grants. Royal service produced offices and property that could support a family for generations. A courtier might receive the keeping of a park, stewardship of a manor, constableship of a castle, lease of land, wardship of an heir, or rights bringing regular income. These rewards did more than make him comfortable. They created clients. A man administering royal property employed deputies, dealt with tenants, recommended officials, and settled local disputes. His influence at court expanded into counties far from the palace. The path could begin beside the king and end in a network of land, marriages, offices, and dependents. This is how personal favor became durable social power. Norris was not powerful only because he could speak to Henry. He was powerful because years of speaking to Henry had accumulated consequences. Still, the court never allowed complete security. Every grant attracted attention. Every friendship created rivals. Every private conversation could be described differently by someone excluded from it. Norris served during a period when Henry's marriage, religion, succession, and government were changing violently. The king had spent years seeking an annulment from Catherine of Aragon. He broke with papal authority. He married Anne Boleyn. Parliament declared him supreme head of the Church of England. Monasteries faced investigation and dissolution. Officials rose and fell as policy shifted. A man inside the chamber could not remain outside these conflicts. Even silence became interpretable. Anne Boleyn understood the importance of access. Before becoming queen, she had held Henry's attention through private meetings, letters, court performance, and refusal to accept the ordinary position of mistress. After marriage, she possessed rank but did not control every door around her husband. The king maintained his own male household. Norris belonged to it. Anne and Norris knew one another through years at court. They spoke in the informal language expected among elite courtiers, where wit, flirtation, teasing, and ambiguous compliments could appear without automatically proving adultery. That social style became dangerous in April 1536. Anne's marriage was failing. She had not produced the surviving son Henry wanted. Catherine of Aragon had died in January, removing one obstacle to another marriage. Jane Seymour had attracted the king's attention. Thomas Cromwell and other political figures had reasons to move against Anne. A careless conversation could now be turned into evidence. On the 29th of April, Anne spoke to Norris. Accounts differ in wording and emphasis, but the exchange concerned his delay in marrying Madge Shelton, one of the Queen's attendants. Anne suggested that Norris looked for dead men's shoes. The phrase implied that he waited for Henry's death so he could have Anne. Norris reacted with alarm. To desire the king's wife was treasonous enough. To imagine the king's death moved the joke toward an accusation against his life. Anne attempted to repair the exchange, asking Norris to deny rumors about her conduct. The conversation may have been courtly teasing that went badly. Within the political atmosphere of 1536, it became lethal. Norris's position made the alleged offense especially shocking. He was not a distant admirer. He was the king's trusted companion. He entered Henry's private rooms. He served at the Stool. He had received wealth and honor from the man he was now accused of betraying. The charge, therefore, offered a story of intimate treason. Anne had supposedly committed adultery with men inside the royal household. Norris had supposedly used access given by Henry to violate Henry's marriage and threaten his succession. The accusation attacked the trust upon which the chamber depended. If believed, it transformed every private privilege into evidence of opportunity. On the 1st of May, Norris attended a tournament at Greenwich. Henry left the event abruptly. Norris was questioned and arrested. According to later accounts, the king offered him mercy if he confessed. Norris refused to admit guilt. Mark Smeaton, a musician of lower status, had already confessed after interrogation, though the circumstances and reliability of that confession remained deeply suspect. Other men were arrested. The case moved with extraordinary speed. Dates assigned to alleged adultery were sometimes impossible because Anne or the accused man was elsewhere. The prosecution depended upon broad allegations, hostile interpretation, and a political decision already moving toward conviction. Norris pleaded not guilty. It did not save him. He was tried in Westminster Hall with Francis Weston, William Brereton, and Mark Smeaton. The legal setting looked formal. There were charges, judges, noble spectators, and verdicts. But treason trials involving the king's will did not offer the security a modern defendant would expect. The accused did not receive full access to evidence, independent counsel, or a jury protected from political pressure. Conviction carried death and forfeiture. Norris was found guilty. On the 17th of May 1536, he was executed on Tower Hill with the other men. Anne Boleyn was executed 2 days later. The Groom of the Stool had gone from private companion to condemned traitor in less than 3 weeks. His death exposes the central danger of personal monarchy. Proximity magnified both favor and suspicion. A man far from Henry might be ignored. A man close to Henry could be accused of abusing trust at the highest level. Norris knew the king's habits. That made him useful. The same knowledge could make imagined conspiracy seem plausible. He could reach the Queen. That reflected court life. It also created alleged opportunity. He had received rewards. That proved favor. It could be retold as ingratitude. Every advantage of the office reversed direction. The parliamentary record later described Norris as Henry's trusted friend and master of the Stool. It also preserved the attainder used against him. 3 years after his execution, an act restored his heirs so that property could return to the family. Restitution did not declare him innocent in the modern sense. It repaired some consequences of forfeiture. The crown could destroy a man, and later permit his lineage to continue. This flexibility served monarchy better than truth. Norris remained dead. His family recovered part of what royal justice had taken. The office passed to others. It would be easy to end his story by saying that the king's toilet servant became too powerful. That is not quite what happened. Norris did not fall because he challenged Henry openly or controlled a rival government. He fell because the king's marriage to Anne Boleyn was being destroyed, and men around the queen were required to make the charges appear real. His office increased the drama. It did not create the accusation. The lesson is narrower and more useful. Closeness to power provides information, gifts, and opportunity. It also makes a person available when power needs a victim. Norris could enter without knocking. When the door closed against him, no private friendship reopened it. After Norris, the private chamber continued. One man's execution did not make intimate service less necessary. Henry still needed attendance. He still traveled. Clothes still had to be prepared. Money still moved through private hands. The stool still required a room, linen, water, and servants. The office belonged to a system larger than any favorite. That system can look almost absurd from the outside. A king, surrounded by ceremony, sits upon a velvet-covered chair while gentlemen wait nearby. Yet the same arrangement reveals a practical truth. A ruler is never only an image. Henry's body aged, hurt, digested, slept, bled, and became ill. The court could hide those facts from most subjects, but the men of the chamber could not avoid them. They lived close to the gap between the royal portrait and the physical man. The famous portraits of Henry show control. The king stands broad and upright. His clothes create a wide shape. Jewels, fur, embroidery, gloves, and weapons display wealth. His legs are set apart. His face looks forward without apology. The image is not a lie. Henry possessed authority, confidence, intelligence, and physical presence, but a portrait selects. It does not show the time required to dress the body. It does not show sweat beneath layers of cloth. It does not show digestive discomfort, wounds, fever, dental pain, or difficulty moving. It does not show a servant lifting a basin. The groom saw what the image removed. Henry's health changed over the reign. As a young man, he was athletic and active. He hunted for long periods, played tennis, wrestled, danced, and took part in tournaments. In 1536, the same year Norris died, Henry suffered a serious accident while jousting. His armored horse fell, and contemporary reports indicate that he was unconscious for a time. Historians disagree about how much the injury changed his personality, and simple stories of one blow turning him into a different man go beyond the evidence. What is clear is that physical problems accumulated. Henry had recurring wounds on his legs, including ulcers that became painful and difficult to manage. He gained considerable weight. Movement became harder. Chronic pain, infection, limited activity, rich diet, and age altered his daily life. The private chamber became more medically important because the king needed more care. A leg ulcer required cleaning, dressing, observation, and patience. Physicians and surgeons treated the king according to the medicine of their time. They understood wounds, swelling, drainage, and pain through a mixture of practical experience and humoral theory. Remedies could include poultices, ointments, bandages, cautery, purging, diet, and attempts to keep the wound open or encourage discharge. Some treatment helped, some prolonged suffering. The men closest to Henry saw the results before the public did. They noticed whether he could stand comfortably. They knew when clothing had to be adjusted around bandages. They knew when travel became difficult. They knew whether the smell of an infected wound remained in a room after he left. These were not details for court gossip. They affected government. A king in pain might delay a meeting. A journey might change. A hunt might be cancelled. An ambassador could wait because Henry could not tolerate a long audience. A council might bring papers into the private apartments rather than expecting the king to appear elsewhere. As Henry became less mobile, access to his chamber grew even more important. The ruler moved less. Government moved toward him. The groom's position therefore gained administrative weight near the end of the reign. Control of the doorway meant control of who could speak to an increasingly secluded king. This did not give the groom authority to decide policy alone. It gave him the ability to organize the conditions in which policy reached Henry. That power can be subtle. It is still power. The stool itself could also reveal health. People long observed urine, stool, appetite, sleep, skin, and other bodily signs. Physicians examined urine for color, sediment, smell, and clarity. Digestion occupied a central place in humoral medicine. Constipation, diarrhea, unusual color, blood, pain, or failure to pass waste could cause concern. A groom attending the king would know whether Henry had used the stool and whether the routine appeared normal. This does not justify every modern story claiming that the groom issued detailed medical reports or scheduled petitioners according to bowel movements. Some versions of the tale become comic, because comedy travels well. The broader point requires no invention. A person present during the king's private bodily routines possessed information about his health that most officials lacked. In a hereditary monarchy, the health of one body was public business, even when the evidence remained private. The succession depended upon Henry living long enough to manage it. His son Edward was born in 1537 and remained a child. His daughters Mary and Elizabeth had passed through changing legal status as their mothers fell. Religious factions worried about which advisors would surround the boy if Henry died. A fever inside the bedchamber could alter the plans of every important family in England. The groom did not need to announce that the king was dying. A change in access might announce it for him. If regular visitors were turned away, rumors began. If physicians entered repeatedly, servants noticed. If documents were rushed toward the chamber, ambassadors asked questions. If a favorite stopped appearing in public, someone reported it. Palaces did not keep secrets by becoming silent. They kept them while hundreds of people watched for signs. This makes the rules of secrecy easier to understand. The ordinances of Eltham told chamber servants not to reveal what was said or done inside. Such an instruction would be unnecessary if the private rooms contained nothing important. The king might discuss religion while dressing. He might complain about a minister during supper. He might receive a message from France after everyone expected him to sleep. He might speak about a marriage proposal, military campaign, execution, or grant, while a servant held a garment. A room does not become politically unimportant because a toilet stands in it. In Henry's court, bodily routine and state business often occupied the same space. The modern phrase work-life balance would have meant little inside the royal household. Henry's home was government. The people preparing his meals belonged to an institution. The chapel served both devotion and display. The wardrobe recorded expenditure. The chamber controlled access. The bedchamber sheltered private life but also received documents and officials. A king could move from prayer to hunting, from eating to diplomacy, from illness to patronage, without leaving his household. The groom followed those transitions. That continuity explains why the office expanded beyond sanitation. The man present at the least formal moments became convenient for other private tasks. He was already there. He was already trusted. He already knew what must remain secret. Trust, however, was never complete. Henry's chamber contained multiple servants, partly because no one person should control everything without observation. Gentlemen worked in rotation. Grooms, ushers, pages, barbers, physicians, cooks, launders, guards, and clerks handled different parts of the routine. Household rules separated duties. Objects were counted. Money was recorded. Doors were guarded. The king might favor one man, but an institution surrounded both of them. This matters because popular retellings often imagine the groom alone with Henry every morning, whispering into his ear while the rest of government waited helplessly outside. The real scene was busier. Privacy at court meant restricted company, not necessarily solitude. Even at the stool, another servant might prepare water, bring linen, remove the vessel, or wait in the next room. The groom's rank came from responsibility and access, not from being the only human present. The actual cleaning labor falls into shadow because records preserve senior officers more clearly than the people carrying waste. A gentleman receives grants that leave legal documents. A laundress appears as a wage. A laborer clearing a drain may leave no name at all. This imbalance creates a strange historical effect. We know the title of the man beside the royal toilet. We often do not know the person who emptied it. Follow the vessel after Henry leaves. A lower servant takes it carefully. Spilling waste inside the private apartments would bring punishment and humiliation. The container may be covered before it moves. It passes away from decorated rooms toward service routes. Water is needed. Cloth must be rinsed or sent to laundry. The pot requires scrubbing. Waste enters a privy, drain, pit, cesspool, or watercourse according to the palace and its facilities. The servant then returns the cleaned vessel and prepares for another use. This work is repetitive. It smells. It risks contact with disease. It carries none of the political romance later attached to the groom. The difference between the two workers is the difference between managing intimacy and absorbing its dirt. Class divided royal sanitation. The king sat on padded furniture, covered in expensive fabric. A gentleman attended him. A servant handled the waste. A laundress dealt with stained linen. A scavenger or laborer worked farther down the system. The smell moved downward through rank. This pattern appears across palace life. The king ate from precious plate, while kitchen workers stood near heat and smoke. He wore embroidered clothing, while washerwomen and dyers handled chemicals, grease, water, and heavy cloth. He travelled under canopies while labourers loaded carts. Royal splendour was not separate from physical work. It rested upon it. The Groom story attracts attention because it reverses expectation. We expect unpleasant work to belong to someone powerless. Instead, a high-ranking courtier appears beside the toilet. But the reversal is incomplete. The courtier did not become equal to a cleaner. He approached the king as a gentleman. His presence was honorable because the lower tasks could still be passed elsewhere. The title preserved the intimacy. The household distributed the dirt. Understanding that distinction prevents us from turning a history of labor into a joke about one nobleman and one royal backside. The same caution applies to Tudor cleanliness. The absence of modern plumbing does not mean everyone accepted filth without concern. People washed hands and faces. Linen worn near the skin was changed and laundered. Basins, cloths, combs, scents, herbs, soap, and water all belonged to personal care. The barber was ordered to maintain cleanliness. Rooms were swept, aired, and supplied with fresh rushes or coverings. Standards and methods differed. Water had to be carried. Heating it required fuel. Full-body bathing demanded preparation. Waste disposal remained imperfect. Crowded palaces created smell and disease. Yet the household understood that the king's body and surroundings required care. Cleanliness was difficult, not absent. Henry's close stool coverings also show the problem of luxury. Sheepskin and velvet created comfort and display, but fabric near a toilet absorbed moisture and smell. It needed maintenance. Ribbons frayed, padding wore down, wood cracked, metal corroded. Travel damaged furniture. An inventory could record the object as valuable. Daily use slowly changed it into something less elegant. A new covering might be ordered. A damaged stool might be repaired. Old material could be removed. The king's waste did not respect decoration. That is one of the quiet truths of material history. Beautiful objects still have practical lives. By Henry's final decade, a new group of chamber officers had emerged. Among them was Anthony Denny. Denny came from a family connected to law and royal administration. He received an education at St. Paul's School in Cambridge. He entered court service, became a gentleman of the Privy Chamber, and rose through positions that placed him closer to Henry. By the early 1540s, he handled the privy purse. In 1546, he became first Chief Gentleman of the Privy Chamber and Groom of the Stool. He inherited an office changed by the king's age. William Compton had served an athletic young monarch. Henry Norris had stood beside a king in the crisis of Anne Boleyn's fall. Anthony Denny served a ruler whose body was failing and whose succession remained unsettled. Denny's responsibilities reached far beyond the chair. He managed private money. He helped control the chamber. He received grants of property, including former religious land made available after the dissolution of monasteries. He joined the Privy Council. He participated in confidential decisions. Most strikingly, he became one of the men authorized to use Henry's dry stamp. The stamp reproduced the king's signature on documents. By the mid-1540s, Henry found signing increasingly burdensome. A controlled stamp allowed trusted officers to process papers without requiring his hand on every sheet. This arrangement saved effort. It also created enormous risk. A stamped document carried royal authority even when the king had not physically signed it. The men controlling the stamp stood near the boundary between Henry's will and the machinery that expressed it. Records were kept to check its use. Registers listed documents stamped and later presented for confirmation. Multiple officers shared responsibility. The system did not simply give Denny a box and permission to create laws in secret. Yet, the trust remained extraordinary. A man whose office began with attendance upon the royal body now helped authenticate the royal name. The connection was not accidental. Both duties required intimate confidence. The groom knew when Henry could review a document. He knew which matters had been discussed. He knew who could enter. He knew whether the king was alert, exhausted, angry, or too ill to work. Administrative authority grew from bodily access. This is where the office reaches its clearest political form. Early in the reign, the groom's value came largely from friendship, attendance, and patronage. Late in the reign, the groom also participated in an organized private department handling money, papers, access, and authentication. The Privy Chamber had become part of government. Its officers were not merely companions who happened to hear secrets. They performed administrative work because the king increasingly governed from private space. Denny stood near Henry at the point where the household and the state touched. The final months of Henry's life made that position dangerous. Everyone knew the king was seriously ill. Few could say so openly. To predict the monarch's death could be treated as treason because such predictions encouraged calculation about succession. Courtiers, therefore, watched a dying king while speaking as though recovery remained possible. Henry's leg problems, weight, and declining strength confined him more heavily. Access narrowed. Religious conservatives and reformers struggled over the future of the church and the government of Prince Edward. The people admitted to Henry could influence the information he received and the documents placed before him. Denny belonged to the reform-minded group. His control of chamber access and private business made him central to the last arrangements. A famous tradition says that Denny took the risk of telling Henry that death was near and that he should prepare his soul. The exact words are difficult to recover, and later accounts may shape the scene into a final moral conversation. The situation itself is credible. Someone close enough had to speak plainly. Henry needed spiritual preparation. His will and the arrangements for Edward's minority required attention. The groom of the Stool was suited to the task because his office allowed a kind of honesty that public ceremony discouraged. He had seen the king's body without the portrait. He could not pretend forever that it would recover. Henry died on the 28th of January, 1547 at Whitehall. Edward became king at 9 years old. A council was supposed to govern collectively, but Edward Seymour, the new king's uncle, quickly emerged as Lord Protector. Historians have debated how Henry's final will, dry stamp, chamber politics, and reformist group shaped the succession. Claims of deliberate alteration remain contested, and the evidence does not support turning Denny into a lone forger beside a helpless king. What can be said is substantial enough. Denny possessed rare access during the final days. He helped manage documents and private money. He stood among the men who translated Henry's last decisions into the government that followed. The toilet office had reached the deathbed of a dynasty. Denny survived Henry by only a short time. He died in 1549. Like Compton and Norris, he had gained land, wealth, office, and lasting family advantage through service close to the king. Their endings were very different. Compton died of disease while still favoured. Norris died by execution after favour turned into accusation. Denny died as a respected servant associated with the transition to Edward VI. The same office contained all three careers. That variation prevents any simple rule. The groom could become rich. He could become influential. He could still become sick, expendable, or dead. No title removed ordinary uncertainty. The office also changed depending upon the monarch. Henry VIII liked male companions able to hunt, joust, play, and share private entertainment. His grooms emerged from that masculine chamber culture. A different king might prefer different servants. A child king required guardians. An elderly king required care. A king suspicious of his nobles might choose men of lesser birth. A king dependent upon one favorite might allow the office greater political weight. The title stayed recognizable, while the relationship beneath it shifted. This is true of many court offices. The written duty explains only part of the job. The personality of the ruler explains the rest. A queen's household handled intimacy differently. Male monarchs were attended in their innermost rooms by men. Queens relied heavily upon women of the bedchamber, ladies, chamberers, nurses, and trusted female servants. The work remained political because the same rules of access applied. A woman who dressed a queen, slept near her bed, guarded her jewelry, or carried private messages could become influential. The title Groom of the Stool belonged most famously to male service, but the principle extended across royal households. Intimate attendants knew what the public did not. They saw illness, pregnancy, grief, marriage, conflict, and fear. They controlled small doors leading toward large decisions. When Mary I became queen in 1553, women occupied the private spaces around her body. Her pregnancies, which proved to be false or unsuccessful, were observed by attendants whose reports mattered to a kingdom waiting for an heir. Elizabeth I also built a female household around her bedchamber. Women helped dress her, managed clothing and cosmetics, slept nearby, and witnessed the physical effects of age that royal portraits concealed. They could carry requests from husbands and relatives. They could recommend servants. They could pass information between the queen and court. No close stool was needed to create the political value of intimacy. The mechanism remained the same. Access became influence because monarchy remained personal. Under later kings, the title changed in spelling and emphasis. Groom of the Stool became Groom of the Stole. The newer form sounded less directly connected to excretion, though the office descended from the same private household role. Under the Stuarts and later monarchs, the Groom of the Stole could stand at the head of the bedchamber and supervise personal attendance. The toilet duty faded behind broader household authority. By the 18th and early 19th centuries, parliamentary debate could describe the Groom of the Stole as the first gentleman of the bedchamber and propose giving him control over the household attending an ill king. The title that began beside a chamber pot had become a senior court office. Language cleaned the office more successfully than any servant cleaned the stool. The change also followed the development of government. As departments, ministers, cabinets, and parliamentary systems grew, access to the monarch remained valuable, but no longer functioned in exactly the Tudor way. A groom could still influence appointments or household patronage, A favorite near the king could still matter, yet national administration depended increasingly upon institutions not located inside the bedchamber. The office became more ceremonial and domestic. Its political importance rose or fell according to the monarch and period. Under Queen Victoria, no Groom of the Stool was appointed. The office was not revived afterward. The royal household continued, but one of its strangest titles passed out of use. The chair remained in museums and inventories. The name remained in history. Why, then, has the story become so famous? Part of the answer is obvious. It involves a king and a toilet. Historical stories spread easily when they reduce grandeur to bodily reality. A ruler who commanded armies still needed to relieve himself. A court covered the act with velvet and created a title around it. The contrast is irresistible. It allows modern people to laugh at ceremony while enjoying the secret that power cannot escape biology. But humor can flatten the office. It encourages one repeated image: a nervous nobleman wiping Henry VIII while receiving state secrets. The real history is less neat and more revealing. The groom's influence did not come from the waist. It came from the room. The stool placed him in the room because it required trust. Once inside, he took part in dressing, money, conversation, travel, patronage, health, and access. A modern title might separate these responsibilities into personal assistant, household manager, financial officer, gatekeeper, confidential secretary, and companion. The Tudor court combined them because the king's person sat at the center of government. The toilet was one point in a much larger orbit. The story also survives because it exposes a truth about institutions. Official charts rarely show how decisions actually reach a powerful person. A document may pass through a secretary. A request may succeed because a friend mentions it at breakfast. An appointment may depend upon the person who decides which meeting occurs first. The Tudor groom makes this hidden layer visible. His title sounds absurd, so we notice him. Countless less amusing gatekeepers perform similar work in every age. They manage time, access, mood, and information. They do not need legal authority to affect outcomes. They need the confidence of someone who has it. Return to Henry's apartments for one ordinary day. The palace begins before sunrise. Kitchen fires are already burning. Bakers handle bread. Stable workers check horses. Guards stand through the last cold hour of night. Servants carry wood, water, candles, and messages across yards that will soon fill with courtiers. Near the king's chamber, movement becomes quieter. The pages wake. A fire is made ready. Clothing arrives. The barber waits with clean tools. Gentlemen of the privy chamber gather according to the rota. The groom checks what the morning requires. No one announces that power is beginning. People simply take their places. Henry wakes behind guarded doors. Perhaps he calls immediately. Perhaps the attendants wait. The bed itself may be hung with curtains that trap warmth and create another enclosure within the room. Night clothing has to be removed. Washing water is brought. The barber works. A shirt touches the skin before the heavier garments. Every object has a person attached to it. Someone maintained the linen. Someone repaired the shoe. Someone carried the fuel. Someone recorded the purchase. Someone waited to hand it forward. The king experiences the final object. The household contains the labor that brought it to him. If Henry requires the close stool, the chair is prepared. The vessel is in place. Linen and water are ready. The appropriate attendants remain. Others withdraw or wait beyond the door. The king sits. No trumpet sounds. No chronicler records every morning. This is precisely why the act feels historically distant. The people involved considered it routine enough not to describe in the detail modern curiosity demands. We inherit titles, household rules, payments, inventories, and occasional remarks. From those fragments, later generations build a scene. The empty spaces should remain visible. Henry might speak while sitting, he might not. A private servant learns not to force conversation simply because opportunity exists. Silence can be part of service. If the king complains about pain, the groom listens. If Henry asks about a visitor, the groom answers. If a letter has arrived, it may wait until the right moment. If nothing is said, nothing is invented. The chamber officer survives by judging boundaries. Too little initiative makes him useless. Too much makes him dangerous. The best servant appears to know what the king wants before the request is fully spoken, while never suggesting that he controls the result. Afterward, the king continues dressing. The pot leaves through other hands. The room is put in order. The groom moves to the next duty. A nobleman outside has been waiting since early morning. He hopes for permission to enter. He has brought a petition concerning land disputed by another family. The nobleman does not ask the groom about the stool. He asks whether the king is receiving anyone. He asks whether Henry appears pleased. He asks whether the paper might be presented. The private bodily routine has already become political information without a single secret being revealed. Suppose the groom advises patience. The nobleman waits. Later, Henry hunts. The groom rides near enough to join conversation. The petition is mentioned after a successful chase, when the king is satisfied and willing to hear about loyal service. Henry asks one question. The groom knows the answer. A clerk is told to examine the matter. Nothing has been granted yet. Still, the request has entered the royal mind. The nobleman will remember who carried it there. A gift may follow. A friendship may begin. Years later, a historian might find the grant, but not the ride. This is how influence disappears from records, while remaining present in results. The same mechanism could harm. Another courtier's name might be mentioned in irritation. The groom may repeat a complaint heard elsewhere. Henry may already distrust the man. A delayed audience becomes a sign of disfavor. Rumor spreads. Allies withdraw before any formal charge exists. The gatekeeper does not need to invent evidence. He can affect the order in which Henry hears it. This power was difficult to measure and easy to fear. Excluded courtiers imagined every private servant saying more than he did. The chamber became a screen onto which the outer court projected suspicion. Foreign ambassadors studied this world carefully. Their reports tried to identify who could reach Henry, whose favor was rising, who had quarreled with whom, and which servant might carry a discreet message. An ambassador represented another ruler, but he still needed local intelligence. Formal diplomacy took place in council rooms and audiences. Preparation occurred in conversations with courtiers, secretaries, merchants, clergy, and household officers. A groom might not decide an alliance. He could help determine whether the proposal reached Henry in a useful form. That was enough to make him worth knowing. The king knew this. Henry was not unaware that courtiers cultivated his servants. He could use the system to test loyalty, reward favorites, and keep nobles dependent upon access he controlled. If a duke had to approach through a chamber gentleman, the duke was reminded that birth alone did not open every door. The private household strengthened royal authority by creating distance. It also gave Henry information from multiple channels. A minister presented one account, a favorite offered another. A queen spoke privately. An ambassador used an intermediary. The king could compare them. The chamber did not only isolate Henry, it connected him selectively. Selective connection explains why household factions mattered. Groups formed around religion, family, marriage, office, and personal friendship. A man in the chamber might support reform or tradition. He might owe advancement to Cromwell, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, or another patron. His relatives might seek marriages and grants. The groom could not become politically blank simply by calling himself a servant. Every door he opened benefited someone. Every person kept outside noticed. The office, therefore, attracted both gratitude and accusation. One courtier's trusted intermediary was another's corrupt favorite. William Compton's case provides a useful correction. He became immensely wealthy and received many offices, yet serious study has not shown him directing the great policies of the reign. His career demonstrates self-enrichment and service more clearly than national control. That finding does not make the office unimportant. It makes its importance more precise. Compton converted access into property. He carried out confidential tasks. He belonged to Henry's chosen company. He shaped the court around the king without replacing the king. This is more believable than a hidden minister on a toilet. It is also more typical of power. Henry Norris shows the other side. His access, wealth, and friendship could not withstand a charge of sexual treason. The office made the accusation emotionally powerful because betrayal from a trusted chamber servant seemed worse than betrayal from a stranger. Norris refused confession. The state killed him anyway. His story warns against treating intimacy as protection. A ruler may reveal vulnerability to a servant and still destroy him. Perhaps vulnerability makes destruction more tempting once trust breaks. The person who has seen the king weak becomes dangerous in the king's imagination. No document proves that Henry thought this way about Norris. The structure of the office made such fear possible. Anthony Denny shows the office becoming administrative. By Henry's final years, private money and the dry stamp connected the chamber directly to paperwork. Denny's value lay not only in knowing the king, but in running systems close to him. This development followed need. Henry could no longer move through court as he once had. The chamber became a working center. Denny could bring papers inward and carry authority outward. The stool remained in the title. The real burden increasingly involved decisions, records, and succession. All three men benefited from royal generosity. None received a modern salary as the full measure of reward. Court service opened opportunities for land, wardships, offices, fees, clothing, lodging, gifts, and marriage connections. The king's old garments could themselves carry value. Rich cloth, fur, buttons, and embroidery might be reused, altered, sold, or displayed. Furniture from the chamber could become a privilege. Lodging near the monarch saved time and announced status. A royal servant accumulated advantage in objects as well as money. The material leftovers of kingship flowed toward favorites. The title also carried social contradiction. The groom was subordinate to Henry. He might kneel, wait, carry, assist, and obey. Outside the room, other men deferred to him. This created a ladder in which a person could be servant and patron at once. Tudor society did not divide cleanly into masters above and servants below. Great nobles served the king, gentlemen served nobles, household officers commanded workers. A person's status depended upon whom he served and whom he could command. The groom stood low before one man and high before almost everyone else. That arrangement helps explain why the role did not humiliate its holder in the way modern jokes assume. Honor did not require independence from service. It required service appropriate to rank. To attend the king's body was appropriate for a trusted gentleman because the body was royal. To empty a common privy might belong to a lower worker. The same waste could produce different status according to distance from it. The groom approached the monarch. The cleaner approached the pot. Court hierarchy lived in that small distinction. Still, not every courtier would have wanted the job. Intimacy demanded constant availability. The groom's schedule followed Henry. Travel separated him from estates and family. Illness exposed him to infection. A royal temper could turn quickly. Rivals watched every favor. The man also carried knowledge he could not safely share. A private complaint about a queen, minister, or foreign ruler might remain in his mind for years. He could not repeat it for entertainment. He could not always act upon it. He lived close to decisions without owning them. This form of service could become exhausting. The danger increased when Henry's needs became more difficult. A young king might wake ready to ride. An older Henry might require help moving, dressing around wounds, and managing pain. The attendants could not show impatience. They could not recoil. They could not allow private deterioration to become public disrespect. Care demanded emotional control. A servant cleaned without expression. He heard anger without answering. He absorbed blame for discomfort he had not caused. The luxurious chamber could become a place of fear. We should also resist diagnosing Henry from a distance with certainty. Modern writers have proposed diabetes, endocrine disorders, brain injury, infection, depression, and other conditions to explain his health and behavior. Some possibilities are reasonable. The surviving evidence cannot provide a complete medical record. Pain and illness affected him. They do not alone explain executions, policy, or personality. Healthy rulers can be cruel. Ill rulers can remain rational. The groom saw symptoms more closely than we can, but even he lacked modern diagnostic tools. The body remains partly hidden despite all this intimacy. The same is true of the stool's daily use. No surviving diary says that Henry followed one exact toileting routine every morning. No reliable schedule tells us how often the groom touched him. We should not fill every silence with the most memorable possibility. Historical reconstruction works best when it separates levels of confidence. The close stool existed. Trusted male attendants served Henry in intimate rooms. The groom headed that private service and gained access, patronage, and administrative responsibility. Some direct physical assistance is plausible. The repeated claim that every holder personally wiped Henry on every occasion is harder to prove. Accuracy does not remove the strangeness. It reveals where the strangeness truly lies. The remarkable fact is not that one man may have performed one unpleasant act. The remarkable fact is that monarchy built political rank around bodily attendance. A chair, pot, linen, and doorway became part of government because the ruler's person remained inseparable from the state. The office teaches us how power was organized. It moved through chambers. It depended upon trust. It rewarded those who could wait. It exposed the king while protecting his image. It elevated some servants and erased others. It turned ordinary biology into ceremony. Now, return once more to the corridor. The nobleman with the petition is still waiting. He has eaten nothing since morning, because leaving might cost his place. Other courtiers arrive. One pretends not to notice him. Another asks whether the king has risen. A servant carries away a covered vessel without receiving a glance. The door opens. The groom appears. Conversation stops for a moment. He does not announce a policy. He merely tells one man to remain and another to return tomorrow. The corridor rearranges itself around those words. That is what access looks like before it becomes history. Inside, Henry has moved to another room. The close stool stands empty. Its coverings show no political meaning on their own. The wood does not grant offices. The pot does not read petitions. The linen does not advise the king. Meaning comes from the people around it. The king's need creates privacy. Privacy creates a restricted room. The restricted room creates privileged access. Privileged access creates a market for influence. The office grows from that chain. Break the chain, and the groom becomes only a servant. Keep it, and he becomes one of the most watched men in England. This is why the title could outlive Henry. Later courts continued to organize power through the bedchamber, even when the toilet duty faded from view. Kings chose companions, favorites distributed patronage, household appointments became political questions. Parliament debated who should supervise attendance around an incapacitated monarch. The office's later dignity was not a misunderstanding. It was the mature form of the same principle. The person closest to the sovereign occupied a strategic position. The stool had been the beginning, not the limit. By the time Queen Victoria came to the throne, the old office no longer fitted the same household structure. She did not appoint a groom of the stole, and the title disappeared from active use. Royal service became professionalized in different ways. Constitutional monarchy limited the direct political force of private favor. Bathrooms changed, plumbing changed, privacy changed. The state no longer traveled through one king's chamber, as it had under Henry VIII. Yet gatekeeping did not disappear. It changed titles. Modern leaders still have private secretaries, chiefs of staff, aides, schedulers, doctors, security officers, and personal assistants. These people do not attend a close stool. They control diaries, documents, briefings, rooms, calls, and interruptions. Their formal powers may be limited. Their practical influence can be considerable. They decide what reaches the powerful person first. They know when exhaustion has shortened attention. They protect privacy. They carry messages between public office and private human life. The Tudor groom feels alien because of the toilet. The rest of the job feels familiar because access still matters. The difference is accountability. A modern official may work within written rules, professional systems, public records, ethics requirements, and institutions designed to continue when one person becomes ill. Tudor England possessed laws and offices, but the king's personal preference remained unusually decisive. The private servant therefore operated closer to the source of authority. Henry's body could delay business. His friendship could create a fortune. His suspicion could produce a death sentence. The groom lived beside all three possibilities. Consider the three careers one final time. William Compton grew up near Prince Henry, rose with him, gained offices and land, and died wealthy while still favored. Henry Norris became a trusted companion and gatekeeper, then was swept into the destruction of Anne Boleyn and executed on accusations almost certainly constructed for political purpose. Anthony Denny served the aging king, managed private money and documents, controlled access, and stood near the arrangements for succession. One office, three versions of power: reward, destruction, administration. None of them was powerful merely because he touched a toilet chair. They were powerful because the chair stood where most people could not. It stood inside the guarded rooms. It stood beside a king whose personal decisions shaped land, religion, marriage, inheritance, and life. The groom entered that space as part of his duty. Everyone outside understood what the duty allowed. The title sounded low. The doorway made it high. The office did not begin with Henry VIII. Earlier English kings already employed servants connected to the royal chamber and stool. A 15th century household could include a yeoman of the stool. By the reign of Henry VII, the title Groom of the Stool appears clearly in royal records. One early holder was Hugh Dennis. Dennis served Henry VII, the founder of the Tudor dynasty. His work developed alongside the Privy Chamber, a more restricted household around a king known for guarding money, access, and personal security carefully. Henry VII had won the throne in battle. His claim remained vulnerable. He survived rebellions, pretenders, plots, and noble families with memories of recent civil war. A ruler in that position had reasons to control who entered his private rooms. The groom's intimacy, therefore, grew within a monarchy concerned not only with comfort, but with safety. The chamber protected the king from physical danger. A person admitted close enough to dress, shave, or attend the stool could also carry a blade, poison, message, or disease. Selection mattered. The attendants had to be loyal. Their own servants had to be watched. Objects entering the room had to pass through known hands. Food, drink, medicine, clothing, and bedding all created points of vulnerability. The groom's trust was practical before it was political. Political influence followed because a man trusted with the king's safety could not remain socially insignificant. Henry VII also used private financial systems. The king's chamber handled money more directly than older public institutions alone. Revenue could pass into accounts controlled close to the monarch. Household officers became involved in financial work because secrecy and personal oversight suited Henry's style of rule. The groom of the stool could therefore stand near both the body and purse of the king before Henry VIII inherited the office. This history explains why the younger Henry did not suddenly decide to promote a toilet attendant as a joke. He inherited a developing position and filled it with men he trusted. The office already belonged to a private machinery of monarchy. Henry VIII expanded its possibilities through his personality, court, and scale of government. The title itself changed because language changes around embarrassment. Stool was once a straightforward word for a seat. The connection between stool and excrement developed because the seat was used for relief. The later spelling stole softened that association and allowed the court office to sound more dignified. This kind of linguistic cleaning happens often. People replace direct words for bodily functions with polite expressions. Those expressions eventually acquire the same embarrassing meaning and are replaced again. Privy once meant private. A privy became a toilet because it was placed in a private location. Latrine, necessary house, house of office, jakes, closed stool, and chamber pot all describe parts of the same bodily need while moving attention away from the waste itself. The court was especially skilled at elegant naming. Household records preserve the office through materials rather than confession. They list wages. They name officials. They describe rooms. They order servants to attend. They record cloth, ribbons, pots, furniture, travel, and expenditure. They rarely explain the emotional experience of standing beside the king. No groom left a frank memoir describing every morning. This forces us to reconstruct practice from administration. The method resembles looking at footprints rather than the person walking. A payment for linen suggests use. An order of attendance suggests presence. A grant suggests favor. A rule of secrecy suggests information worth hiding. Together, the fragments create a credible world without giving us every intimate movement. The silence also reflects respect. Writing openly about the monarch's excretion could be considered indecent or insulting. A courtier who documented too much risked turning service into ridicule. The title was public. The physical detail remained discreet. Modern readers often interpret the absence of description as invitation to imagine the most extreme version. Tudor discretion should produce caution instead. The household knew what the office involved. It did not need to explain the obvious to itself. We do. Travel made the office more demanding than a fixed palace routine suggests. The court moved because kings hunted, inspected regions, escaped disease, visited estates, met foreign rulers, celebrated festivals, and shifted according to season. A royal progress could bring hundreds of people and large quantities of baggage onto roads not designed for them. Beds were dismantled. Tapestries were packed. Plate traveled under guard. Kitchen equipment followed. Wardrobe chests carried clothing. The close stool joined this moving household. Wherever Henry slept, a private body service had to be recreated. An advance group prepared lodgings. Rooms had to be assessed for security and rank. A chamber suitable for a local gentleman might not satisfy a king. Walls received hangings. Furniture was moved. A place for worship, eating, sleeping, dressing, and private relief had to be organized. Water sources mattered. Waste routes mattered. The presence of hundreds of visitors strained local supplies. Food prices could rise. Fields suffered. Hosts gained honor and endured enormous expense. The groom's duty traveled through this disruption. He needed the stool available before the king needed it. Royal dignity depended upon anticipating ordinary necessity. Weather made the task worse. A winter chamber could be cold despite fires and hangings. Metal and pottery vessels chilled. water froze or became difficult to carry. Damp cloth dried slowly. Summer created smell. Heat intensified crowded rooms and made waste disposal urgent. Road travel shook furniture and broke containers. Rain turned courtyards into mud. The king's private convenience rested upon servants solving these problems without allowing them to appear in public ceremony. The better the household worked, the less visible the work became. This invisibility affected the groom as well. Courtiers saw the result of his access, not the hours of attendance behind it. They saw a grant. They did not see waiting outside Henry's bed while the king slept late. They saw the groom ride near the king. They did not see preparation, packing, account checking, or unpleasant care. They saw the man enter forbidden rooms. They imagined every minute inside produced influence. Much of it produced routine. Power often includes boredom. The groom could spend long stretches doing nothing dramatic. He waited, he listened, he supervised, he checked whether objects were ready. He repeated instructions. He ensured another servant had completed a task. He accompanied the king without speaking. The office became politically valuable because these ordinary hours accumulated. One spectacular conversation rarely creates trust. Hundreds of uneventful mornings do. This is why a new favorite could not instantly replace a servant who had known Henry for years. Familiarity was an asset built slowly. Familiarity could also create informal honesty. A minister, approaching in council, presented arguments carefully. A groom who had watched Henry struggle with a boot or complain about a meal could sometimes speak more plainly. That freedom should not be romanticized. The king could still punish unwelcome speech. A wise servant understood how far familiarity extended. He might joke about hunting. He might advise caution about a petitioner. He would not forget that the man beside him could order his imprisonment. The private chamber reduced ceremony. It did not remove sovereignty. This tension appears in every surviving career. Compton knew Henry before kingship, yet depended upon continued favor. Norris was called friend, yet died as traitor. Denny handled the king's signature, yet remained a servant carrying out royal will. Their closeness was genuine, so was the distance. A groom could see the king undressed without becoming his equal. The body was exposed. Authority was not. The public court reinforced that difference after the private routine ended. Once dressed, Henry moved outward through rooms of increasing audience. The same man who had required linen now appeared beneath cloth of estate. Courtiers bowed, guards opened space. Music, heraldry, and rank surrounded him. The transition happened every day. The groom witnessed both versions. He knew that majesty had been assembled by hands. He also knew that everyone obeyed it once assembled. This knowledge could produce loyalty, cynicism, affection, fear, or some mixture we can no longer recover. The office, therefore, belongs to the history of performance as much as sanitation. Kingship required a public body that appeared controlled. Private attendants managed the moments when control weakened. Illness had to be contained. Clothing concealed wounds. Ceremony concealed dependence. Silence concealed embarrassment. The groom helped maintain the boundary. His political value came partly from protecting the image everyone else needed to believe. If a servant publicly mocked Henry's body, the offense would be more than rudeness. It would damage majesty. If he revealed sexual weakness, incontinence, severe illness, fear, or incapacity, enemies could use the information. A king's body carried dynastic meaning. Fertility promised heirs. Strength promised military leadership. Health promised continuity. Private attendants guarded symbols as well as flesh. The close stool sat at the least glamorous edge of that protection. This helps explain why the office feels both ridiculous and serious. The object invites laughter. The stakes discourage it. A chamber pot can become comic in an ordinary household. Under a king, the same pot touches questions of secrecy, health, succession, rank, and access. The waste remains waste. The institution around it changes its meaning. That combination is the heart of the story. Money gives us one final way to measure the office. A royal household consumed enormous sums, but not every payment followed the same route. Large departments supplied food, fuel, transport, wages, buildings, clothing, and ceremony. The king also wanted money available for immediate personal use. He rewarded a messenger. He lost at cards. He bought a jewel. He gave alms. He paid a musician. He tipped a servant. He sent money to someone whose name did not need to appear in a public account. The privy purse met this need. A chamber officer who kept it had to record enough to prevent complete disorder while preserving the flexibility Henry valued. The amounts could be small compared with war finance and still reveal the king's world. A payment shows where Henry spent attention. Repeated rewards show favor. Money sent before a journey shows preparation. Gifts at New Year reveal relationships through objects exchanged between ruler and court. A private account becomes a diary written in numbers. The keeper did not necessarily know the full reason behind every payment. He knew more than most people. This knowledge increased his value to petitioners and historians alike. A courtier seeking favor might first try ceremony. He offered a New Year gift appropriate to rank. Gold, silver, jewelry, fine cloth, books, weapons, horses, food, or crafted objects entered the palace. Henry gave gifts in return, and the value of each exchange could be studied for signs of favor. But gifts alone did not guarantee access. The object needed to reach the king. The giver wanted Henry to notice the workmanship, remember the name, and connect generosity to a request. A chamber officer could help arrange that moment. The groom's role did not make every gift corrupt. It made presentation part of politics. Clothing offered another stream of value. Royal garments were expensive enough to function as rewards. A gown, coat, piece of fur, or length of fabric associated with Henry carried material and symbolic worth. The groom and chamber servants worked among these objects daily. They knew which garment was new, which had been altered, which no longer fitted, and which might pass from the king's wardrobe into another household. Receiving the king's old clothes did not mean wearing an unwashed shirt taken from the floor. Garments could be cleaned, resized, divided, stripped of valuable trim, or given formally. Royal intimacy produced a second-hand economy more prestigious than new clothing from an ordinary shop. Lodging operated in the same way. A room inside a palace was not simply somewhere to sleep. It saved hours of travel and placed a courtier near information. A man lodged close to the privy chamber could respond when called. Visitors knew where to find him. Servants carried news past his door. The allocation of rooms therefore generated conflict. A chamber officer might occupy space another noble wanted. A favorite's household spread into adjoining rooms. When the court moved, the competition began again. Architecture became patronage. The groom did not need to own the palace. His position inside it produced advantage. Time was the rarest gift. Henry could create more titles and grant more land, but each day contained only so many private hours. Everyone wanted part of them. The groom helped distribute those hours. A 5-minute conversation before Mass could matter more than a formal letter read weeks later. A private supper could do more for a courtier than months of attendance in public chambers. A hunting journey allowed repeated contact without the stiffness of an audience. This is why men endured long waiting. They were competing for time near the monarch. The groom lived inside the schedule, others chased. His own time, however, was not free. The office chained him to the king's routine. If Henry traveled, he traveled. If Henry hunted before dawn, the chamber prepared before dawn. If Henry remained awake with games or music, servants remained available. The ordinances of Eltham specifically warned chambermen not to complain about the king going late or early to bed. That instruction sounds almost domestic. It also reveals the discipline of favor. A man who wanted the privileges of intimacy surrendered control of his hours. Secrecy could isolate him further. The groom might know why Henry had refused an ambassador, but he could not explain it to friends. He might know a queen's position was collapsing before the court understood, yet speaking could expose him. He might receive requests from 2 rivals and mention only one. Every choice created an offended person. The office filled his rooms with petitioners while limiting what he could honestly tell them. Influence attracted company. Confidentiality prevented openness. The dry stamp intensified this pressure under Anthony Denny. A paper bearing Henry's stamped signature could release money, confirm an appointment, issue an instruction, or move business forward. Officers kept registers because misuse would be difficult to detect after the document entered government. The stamp did not replace every seal or legal form. It authenticated the king's approval within a broader documentary system. Still, possession of it placed physical royal authority in the hands of servants. Earlier grooms had managed the king's bodily privacy. Denny helped manage the mechanical reproduction of his name. Both tasks required trust that could not be granted widely. The stamp also shows Henry's dependence without reducing him to helplessness. He continued to review registers and authorize use. The system existed because the volume of business and his physical condition made direct signing difficult. Government adapted around the king. The adaptation gave chamber officers more work. This is a repeated pattern in monarchy. When a ruler becomes less accessible, intermediaries gain importance. They do not necessarily seize power. They become necessary to its movement. A necessary intermediary can appear more powerful than he is. People blame him for refusals because the king remains distant. They praise him for grants Henry chose. They assume he has hidden motives because they cannot see the conversation. The groom becomes the face of an invisible process. This could enrich him. It could also make him a target for every disappointed petitioner. The closer he stood to the source of favor, the more resentment collected around him. Even comedy could become dangerous. A joke about the stool might insult the king through the servant. A joke shared with the king could mark the groom as intimate. Anne Boleyn's exchange with Norris shows how courtly teasing could be reread as treason when politics changed. Words spoken in familiar company did not remain safe simply because everyone had laughed. Private speech created its own archive in memory. An enemy could retrieve it later. The groom guarded the king's secrets while hoping others would forget his. This was the true price of the office. Not the smell, not the linen, not the embarrassment modern audiences imagine. The price was dependence upon one person's continuing trust. Property, access, income, and family advancement could rise from that trust. They could also collapse with it. Compton, Norris, and Denny lived near the center because Henry wanted them there. No law guaranteed that he would want them tomorrow. The direct answer to our question is now clear. The king's toilet servant became one of England's most powerful men because he was not only a toilet servant, he was a trusted gentleman of the Privy Chamber. He attended the monarch's body. He helped manage private rooms. He guarded access. He knew the king's habits and health. He could carry petitions, messages, and names into spaces closed to most subjects. In later years, the office connected to the privy purse, paperwork, and the royal dry stamp. The toilet explains the intimacy. The intimacy explains the power. The answer also needs limits. No groom could order Henry to grant a favor. No chamber officer replaced ministers, parliament, courts, or council. The holder's influence depended upon the king continuing to trust him. The work varied between reigns and individuals. Lower servants performed much of the dirty labor. And the most famous detail, personal wiping, is repeated more confidently than surviving evidence warrants. The responsible history is not less interesting. It is more human. It shows a court attempting to protect majesty without denying biology. It shows gentlemen competing to serve. It shows invisible workers carrying away what splendor produced. It shows power gathering around restricted rooms. It shows a king who could be magnificent in public and dependent in private. And it shows that dependence did not make him less dangerous. Henry needed the men of his chamber. He could still enrich, dismiss, imprison, or execute them. The palace grows quiet now. The morning crowd has moved into the business of the day. The great hall empties after a meal. Clerks carry papers. Horses leave the gate. Somewhere in the private apartments, a fire burns low. The close stool has been cleaned and returned. Its velvet covering is smooth again. The removable vessel waits beneath the seat. No visitor entering the room would mistake it for a throne. Yet for years, men standing beside it possessed what many nobles wanted more than a seat in council. They possessed time with the king. William Compton is gone. Henry Norris is gone. Anthony Denny is gone. The palaces have changed. Rooms have been demolished, rebuilt, renamed, and opened to visitors. The private route that once filtered a court now carries tourists looking for the spaces where decisions were made. Few pause long before an old toilet chair. It appears small beside painted ceilings, tapestries, armor, and royal portraits. That smallness is deceptive. History often survives in objects too ordinary to look powerful. A throne shows the king as he wanted to be seen. A close stool shows the system required when no audience was watching. The throne needed ceremony. The stool needed trust. One placed Henry above his subjects. The other placed one servant close enough to see that the king remained a man. Between those two chairs lies much of Tudor monarchy. Public magnificence on one side, private dependence on the other. And around both, people competing for access. Tonight, the door to the Privy Chamber can finally close. The petitions outside may wait until morning. The barber has put away his knives. The linen has been carried to the laundry. The last chamber servant checks the fire and lowers the light. The king's chair stands empty. The man who attended it has left the room with no crown, no army, and no great seal. Yet tomorrow, dukes and ambassadors will seek him again, because in Henry VIII's England, power did not always belong to the person with the grandest title. Sometimes it belonged to the man who was already inside when everyone else was told to wait.